Okay, hello everyone. I'm speaking to Hartmut Winkler here. He's a professor at the University of Johannesburg in physics, and he's here to oppose nuclear power. Is that correct?
Uh, yes, at least in its current form. And as it's being applied in South Africa. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to understand this. You're not against nuclear power from an ideological perspective. There's another reason for
No,
that.
no, I mean, my main objection at the moment involves the cost of the whole thing, and also the way the whole thing is being managed, the lack of transparency and all the issues that come as a result of that. The safety issue is, of course, also can't just be swept under the carpet. There are accidents that do happen, but as far as I'm concerned, the major issues, major problems revolve around cost and transparency.
Okay, so I would, agree that safety is a priority for nuclear, but I've worked on nuclear projects and they do take safety seriously. At least the people working, they are professional in their job. So it's normally not about that. Of course, accidents can happen, but if you look at deaths per kilowatt hour or per gigawatt hour, nuclear still comes out on top, even above solar and wind. Although it depends on which study you ask for. That's what I've come to conclude, right?
Yeah.
But what is the problem currently with the South African proposal? Because they're proposing, my understanding, they want to build four new nuclear power stations. They're not always saying four, and
Yes,
there's
that's
not
right.
a transparency in cost.
Yeah. I mean, the latest is that they've gone down to 2.5 gigawatts. How exactly that's going to be arranged and how they're going to do that in terms of the existing technologies, I'm not sure. Initially, in the past, it was very clear that they were looking for 9.6 gigawatt, and which exactly matched the Russian sort of design. And I think that was one of the problems with the earlier proposal. It was really just set up with one winner in mind. I don't know why other countries even bothered. And in fact, when this issue, which has come up at our Zondo Commission into the inquiry into what's referred to as state capture, I mean, this whole question came up about the nuclear deal back in the 5-6 years ago. How did this come about, and why was it that the Russians were clearly front runners, so much so that they were almost assured of getting the contract in terms of what was written in the government gazette at the time, and as a result, also the whole thing was then declared illegal. So the first run up was really quite a very badly done, but I suppose some people thought that this is really how you could pull it through. And I think that sort of left a bad taste in the country. So what certainly, I think 10 years ago, when originally the idea of putting up new nuclear power stations came out, and it was also part of the integrated resource plan for electricity, I think that the level of objection in the country was much lower then. And that was also partly because at that stage, renewables were not nearly as competitive as they are now. They were definitely more expensive. And since then, the price of renewables has dropped so dramatically that it's really changed the whole ball game. Yeah.
But are renewables competing against nuclear? Because nuclear is generally said to be baseload energy, and renewables, it's intermittent. You have to back it up at the moment with gas. Battery technology, apparently it's falling, but there's not enough batteries and materials yet there. I mean, it's not saying it can't happen. And we saw now in Texas and in the UK with the cold snap that it's not just the renewables, it's the gas as well. Okay, both of that integrated system failed in a bit, and that hiked up the price. And some critics, and I'm kind of on that side, are saying maybe the cheap cost of renewables is a bit oversold. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I'm saying people have to maybe look at it again. And if you add that factor of risk due to blackout, does that still make nuclear, according to you, uncompetitive?
It does, because of the situation right now in South Africa. If we look at what most of the system is based on, is a coal power station, which is what would be traditionally called baseload as well. If one looks at the total energy that's coming from renewables at the moment, we're talking about something like 3% or so. So it's absolutely minute. And this is not going to change over, I would say, 30 years or so. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a situation where renewables are going to be covering 100% of the electrical system. Clearly, under the current technology, unless there's major developments with storage, that's not going to happen. But with Medupi and Kusile power stations currently, well, still being built, and once they come online, I'm sure the expected time span for those would be 20 years at least, more like 30 or 40. It's
if ever,
it's a big amount of base load, which is not going to go away. Also, the current Kubo plant, which it's pretty much decided now that its lifespan is going to be extended by 20 years. That adds a bit of extra traditional base load. And so it's not, yeah.
Yeah, but the problem in South Africa is we cannot get projects done. I think that is a big issue. And then obviously with the nuclear, I mean, that previous deal, look, I'm an enthusiast for nuclear. I just think energy dense technology is great. But I looked at the previous contract and the details, and I said, you know what, even as an evangelist for the cause, I could not come to support it. And what, you know, I'm not seeing from the government side any guarantees at the moment that what the critiques were during the last deal has actually gone away. It seems to me like a copy and paste of the previous thing, if anything.
Yes, that's right. And I think it still involves very much the same people. And I think that's the problem with the current thing as well. It's if one looks at the integrated resource plan, the one that's currently in existence, it doesn't foresee any new nuclear until 2030. So, okay, now, in a sense, you get two arguments. Some people will tell you, yes, you can build a new nuclear plant in 4 years. So, others will tell you, like me, will tell you it'll take you 10 years. So it's oddly enough that if you really did want to build something after 2030, you would actually need to start right now. But instead, what's happening is that the new plant is being driven full steam ahead at the moment, even though I think there's general admission that this wouldn't be operational until 2030 at least. Whereas some of the other things which could come online much more quickly are being stalled. And again, if one looks at
that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, that is what doesn't make sense to me. I mean, South Africa has electricity shortage. Okay, we can criticize renewables and all we want. We've got no option at the moment but to scale them up. I mean, that is just my conclusion. If we want to grow the economy, now I'm saying for nuclear. I think if we build it through South Korea, which is not Russia, I think they got one in 8 years done, which was a very good one. It must be said, the nuclear power station in Dubai, okay, which is supplying 25% of their power, is managed mainly by South Africans, the construction site. So it's our engineers working there, right? So I don't think it's a question of not having the skills. That is a point to make here. We can do it, but under very limited conditions. And then the question is, will the cost, will the money be stolen? Will it be done? Will it go the way of Medupi and Kusile? And I think you guys have got a point. Those who are opposed to it, I don't think South Africa can do it, and that's and it's sad to me to say it.
Yes, I think you're right in that respect. A country like the United Arab Emirates, they have got a lot of resources. For them, if they build a new plant, they're not throwing all their eggs in one basket. They're using a relatively small fraction of their resources, and they also seem to be, for many reasons, the ones that are most likely to actually carry out a project like that in reasonable time. Then again, I think a lot of the plants currently under construction and that includes a country which is as advanced in nuclear as France, have had very big delays on some of their projects. So just to actually put the first spade down and start digging in that, I think there's such a lot of process hoops one would still have to jump through. So I really don't think that even if the whole country was fully on board and wanted to get this thing done within the shortest span possible, I don't think it's actually anything would happen seriously until about 3 years' time or so. And then would come the building phase. We can also look at similar examples. One looks at the Turkish, the Egyptian, or Bangladesh builds. Okay, those are all Rosatom builds. And so one can look at what's happening there. I even see the funding model as possibly the only one that would be considered here, where effectively the company, in that case Rosatom, supplies a major loan, and it just expects the host country to come up with a relatively small percentage. I think for Turkey it was 15%, whereas Rosatom comes up with 85%. But then, of course, a few years down the line, the country would be expected to pay back that. So
do we have?
if something like that ever came about. And that's under the
So
ideal
if you look at
circumstance.
if you look at the other ideal countries that have a very good nuclear program, which is France, it used to be Germany, but they went, post Fukushima, I think they panicked a bit, but it's their choice. And Sweden, France and Sweden, they've got very cheap electricity. Okay, so it's not a question of nuclear cannot provide it, but the way they financed it was through low interest loans. Now, my big worry in South Africa has been our credit rating is downgraded. Are we going to get those loans to fund this project?
Yes,
And then the economics
especially
just runs away
especially
because
stimulus run, which is
in
got
France, the number in my head is 3%.
Yes, that's right. I think that's also what
Sorry,
the Russian programs are offering. But yes, that's always going to be a tough thing to do in South Africa. Ultimately, the money is not really there. They are going to rely on other things. And even if a build starts because it's such a long-term investment, if there's some sort of a change in the supplier, and let's just say for argument's sake, the supplier goes under, which is not impossible, then the whole thing crashes as well. So to me, I can see why a country like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates would try for something like that. For them, the risk is relatively low. If for whatever reason the whole project collapses, they've got extra funds that they could invest to either complete it, or even if they just drop it entirely, it's something they can stomach relatively easily. But for a country like South Africa, and we're talking about other countries also talking of nuclear. I mean, I've heard of Sudan, I've heard of Zambia. I mean, Zambia's
there's 7 African countries that's looking into it. Rwanda is putting a team together. Some of it is Rosatom. Look, I must just say this as well. Rosatom's technology is not bad. Okay, it's not that it's Russian; it's evil. From the plants that I've seen, I personally like the French one because the design I'm comfortable with, and it's the one we've got at Koeberg. But the big challenge to nuclear has always been it needs to be a very long-term outlook for a country. And it's part of a massive industrialization program. And if a country is prepared to do that democratically, I'm saying, okay, fine, let's do it. But let's be honest about the numbers first.
Yes, that's right. I think that the biggest enemy of the whole nuclear program in South Africa are actually the people who are pushing for it at the moment. I think there's a lack of trust in those that are actually seem to want to have this happen. I'm not talking about the ordinary people working in the nuclear field, but certainly some of the leadership. And it hasn't helped what happened 5 years ago. But if there was to be a more transparent process where people are genuinely will admit that, look, this is how much it's likely to cost. These are the risks, and we feel we should go this route for this and this and this reason. I think it stands a greater chance of success. I don't think the time right now is the right for this sort of thing being pushed. I think there needs to be some sort of a recovery from the sort of post-COVID experience, and then maybe in 3 or 4 years' time, depending on how renewables do, how battery technologies have changed and so on, then one can look at the whole question again. Is this something to push for? I think what the nuclear community in the country needs to do, I think the first thing is that they need to come out very clearly and say that, look, what we did in the past was wrong, and we distance ourselves from this. They haven't done that. They keep on trivializing how they were pulled into this whole big operation, which would have cost the country an enormous amount of money. So I think they just need to be quite honest. They need to get their house in order. And there was already a move towards that. I was very happy when Rob Adam, I don't know, aware of him when he was made in charge of the Nexa board. But I mean, he's gone. I got to get the sense that he was they weren't comfortable with him being there. But he, as far as I'm concerned, he had exactly the right attitude. He said that, look, let's forget about new nuclear build. Let's focus on the thing which Nexa is good at, which is isotopes and so on. And also looking after the radioactive waste. I mean, that's effectively in the hands of that organization, and this is something which is not going to go away. So people often think that if a new nuclear build doesn't start, that immediately the whole nuclear sector in this country instantly collapses. It doesn't. I think nuclear is going to be around in this country for the next 30 years or so at least. And it's simply because
I personally would like for us to expand our nuclear fleet. Okay, if we're going for baseload, I think as a long-term strategy, it's not a bad idea. Okay, and that's maybe where I might disagree with Anthony about them. I don't think renewables can power the whole country. I think it's part of the solution. My big worry has been the cost, as you say, but isn't then shouldn't we then send a message to NERCs and say to them, listen, we don't want to fight and constantly oppose and go, be opposed because we're looking ideologically. We've got certain conditions that we would accept, and under those very certain conditions, we can accept nuclear power, provided that the economics work.
I think to me it's a question of economics. I think if somebody comes up with a good argument about how this is indeed sustainable, how it's transparent, and so on, I think I wouldn't be taking the hardline position that I am. So it's not an ideological thing to me. It's also that I don't think Coburg is going to explode tomorrow. There is always a danger that if things are not maintained properly or if something goes horrendously wrong, that something might happen. But to me, that is not the issue. Something can always happen somewhere. But to me, it's really a question, is this a wise option for a country which really doesn't have many financial resources? And in the last 5-10 years, things have really not gotten any better. They've gotten worse. So the country really has to be very careful about how it uses whatever funds it has got available. And those must be risk-free investments. And I don't see the nuclear, even if it is financed from outside, we don't want to end up with a situation where a half-finished plant stands there but can't be finished because actually the price needs to go up even more, which is what's happened at Medupi and Kusile. I mean, the only reason they're finishing those plants is because they've already thrown such a lot of money in it. And that if they'd known earlier how much...
Did you know how long it's going to take for those plants to be completed?
I mean, some of the units there are already running, although they're also breaking down more often than they should for a new investment. I don't know the exact dates, but I think that we're probably looking at something in the next year or two that everything should be finished. And that is then at least 5, if not more like 10 years later than what they were supposed to be gotten operational. So there have been these delays. The cost has ballooned to more than double of what they said was originally going to be. So the Medupi and Kusile projects, I think, have also played a large role in making the public very skeptical of anything which is involves hundreds of billions and anything which sort of seems to be centrally driven.
Yeah, that's an issue, and I also don't know how we're going to pay back Eskom's debt. I mean, that is a big question that I don't think people appreciate the scale of the problem yet. Because if the state absorbs the debt, we're going to inflate the money supply, your pension.
Yes, that's right. I think Eskom is really in a very difficult situation, and it's also on the question about whether they can actually collect funds. There's, on the one hand, they're finding it increasingly difficult to get municipalities to pay for them. They lost a court case recently which stopped them from just attaching, basically cutting off municipalities. But at the same time, what you're finding, especially with the increased load shedding, is that those that have got the money will install solar panels on their roofs or on their shopping malls or factories and so on. Like, I know even our campus, we've over the course of the last year, a whole lot of parking lots have been turned into miniature solar farms. So that just means less consumption from those that regularly pay, and therefore less income for Eskom. So the whole idea about whether any project, be it a nuclear plant or be it anything else which is big like even a concentrated solar power plant, whether that can actually be entrusted to something like Eskom when it's going to take for quite a long time to actually put up until the actual returns come, is definitely a big question mark. So that's also something one would have to look at. Let's say we do decide that, yes, we need a new plant, 2.5 gigawatts, and the decision is, yes, let's go for nuclear. The question is really who's going to manage that. Is it going to be Eskom? It seems to be, it has to be Eskom, because right now they've got the monopoly over all the electricity supply. So until Eskom gets itself sorted out, that I think it'd be very difficult for it to be at the heart of any project of that scale.
But I mean, because I've had in this channel, I've talked a lot about energy, mainly, just energy in general, and I've talked about the water problem in South Africa. And I would like to, just get your view from the economist or you guys. What is our way forward as South Africa with electricity? I understand you're saying solar and that can be privatized, but is that going to bring the necessary industrial-based power that we need? Is that feasible to expand the economy?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why the power is failing such a lot at the moment is because the coal power plants are having so many breakdowns. So Eskom has now changed its strategy to one that is more maintenance intensive. So they have gone back to a proper schedule of maintenance at the plants, and but even now, I think they typically at any particular moment in time they have 5 gigawatts of power offline for maintenance. Yet whenever there's load shedding, the breakdown, the unplanned maintenance, and other things which just happened and went wrong, are something of the order of 14 gigawatts. So far more things are breaking down than should be. I mean, they should be much lower than that. And I know Chris Yellen, for example, he has all these graphs of the Eskom availability factor over the years, and you can just see it go steadily down and down. So one of the things is that one will need to take a decision with the coal plants. Is one going to try and keep them going? If yes, then one will need to invest quite a bit of money in them, and that then, yes, effectively, you've got some of the baseload power that you would be referring to. I don't think too many people would want to build new coal plants at the moment, just because there's this international sentiment against carbon emissions. There are actually part of the electricity plan for the countries, 2 relatively small ones, but those will rely on outside finance. I don't really think that those will actually happen.
Well, at this moment, my view with decarbonization, it's a big issue in Europe, obviously, and everyone's looking at it. They're going for solar, wind, fine. I had a guy on last night that disagreed with me, and I said we can go for that. It's not an issue. I don't think Africa at this stage can really pursue decarbonization in the sense that the rest of Europe can. If we have to build coal for power, we need to get coal for power, right? If we can get solar to do a job, fine, let's do it. But our primary objective at the moment must be addressing poverty and unemployment and those things. The decarbonization has to wait for the first world can lead on that.
Yes, well, if one looks at some countries outside South Africa that and the problems they've had with electricity, I mean, it makes our load shedding every couple of weeks for a couple of hours, look like a joke. I mean, they would love to have these sort of conditions. As an anecdote, I know one of my Nigerian colleagues says that when they used to be students, the control save, they used to use it every minute because they expected their computer power to crash any moment. So certainly those countries are in dire need of something new, because also when one looks at what they've actually got at the moment, it's very, very little. And they very often don't have their own coal resources, so it's very often stuff was just shipped in. So for them, it really is a difficult question. And plus, they've got growing population, they've got a large economic growth. So for them, the situation is more acute. Whether nuclear is going to be the answer, I don't think in their case either, because simply of the outlay. But Yes, I don't have a solution other than that I know something will have to happen. If somebody can come up with some answer
what's your view on the SMRs that's coming? I know it's not a solution for South Africa because SMRs are not they're not there yet, but that's right. Potentially.
That's right. All right. It's certainly the whole concept has gained a few supporters, notably people like Bill Gates and so on. And so that's immediately, of course, people say, well, if Bill Gates is willing to put his money there, then there must be something to it. And I see it as, they do bypass the one major criticism of the current nuclear plants, that they are such a long-term investment that takes such a long time to build, where all sorts of things can happen to slow up the process and so on. So it would get around that. I think they would, as you say, they would first need to have an operational one which actually literally does work, and it ends up not costing more than one would expect. If somebody was to come up with something like that, I think the whole game would change, and it would make nuclear a lot more competitive again. I think the one thing one does need to look at is the whole question of the waste disposal, because in theory you could have a mini nuclear reactor in every town then happening, which brings with it all sorts of issues about how one then deals with the after effects and so on. The actual so.
Well, the waste disposal is an interesting one to me, because I think people overestimate the amount of waste. Like, I'm not underestimating the risk. There is high level waste at Koeberg that, to my understanding, is saved on site. There is high level waste in France, and at the moment all the high level waste from the 58 reactors in France form about 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Okay, and then it's the fuse. They do use it to make MOX fields. There's an economy there to recycle the waste as well. Look at that potential, but I don't think South Africa is there yet to even discuss those things.
No, I mean, at the moment, what does get taken out just gets buried in the Makwaland, and I guess there's scope for reprocessing some things, but we're not quite at that level yet. Yes, by all means, I think carry on exploring the whole idea of SMRs, but at this stage one can't really rely on it for energy planning. I think, to me, at the moment, certainly as far as South Africa is concerned, what the nuclear sector in this country needs to focus on is, first of all, just sorting out NEXA, getting their program of isotope production and so on up and going in. I think they've been doing very nice work.
Okay.
I know many of my colleagues use their isotopes, rely on their isotopes for some of their research, and just in the medical sector, I think this is they've done well, and they've run that sector profitably. And I think the eyes will be also on them to see how they handle this whole upgrade of Koeberg. It's supposed to be complete roughly in about 4 or 5 years' time. So if this can be done in a transparent manner, and it's going to be a lot of work, and I think that's really what the nuclear people at Eskom and any other people in industry or in the sector that work in that, that's really what they should be focusing on. Because yes, you are right. Once Koeberg is up, once a station like Koeberg is up and running, then for the next 20 or 30 years, yes, indeed, one does get the cheapest electricity from
Koeberg has got
a problem.
So I worked for the company here that is probably going to do the upgrade, French company, right? And with Koeberg, with the power stations, they were usually built for 40 years lifetime, some of them for 60 years. Okay? Mm-hmm. You can take it up to a maximum of 80 years. That's currently the acceptable thing in industry. Mm-hmm. And we're not even sure if we're going to get to 80 years, but we can technically get another 20 years out of Koebergs, no problems. Okay, it's going to take work. It's lots of things to do. After that, you're going to have to talk about decommissioning. You're going to have to talk about the end of the life of the project, and that discussion will have to come as well. How do we treat the waste then? My understanding of Koeberg has been that, at least I'm told by the people, that the decommissioning cost is in a fund or something, and we know how to do it. I don't know how entirely true it is.
Yes, there is that fund, and it actually did come up in you might have heard of the squabbles they had at NEXA between where the previous board was fired and replaced with a new one. This whole question of that fund, I think, was part of it, because yes, it's supposed to be standing there untouched. And if I get what they were saying correctly, is that that fund wasn't. I'm not sure if something's gone missing or if it's still there or if it was whatever was used. I really don't know. Can't remember the full details offhand. But yes, you are right. There is a fund there. Whether how much that fund is actually going to cover, that's really an open question. Is it going to cover all the costs? Is it going to cover part of the cost? But yes, something is there. There is a provision which was set up there when.
Okay. So it's just because that's what the nuclear industries, their critique has been against the renewable. Because remember, they're not fighting against the renewables. Okay, so there's competition in the energy market. Everyone is trying to make the other guy look like. Everyone is trying to play victim and let the other one look like the demon. Okay, this is the strategy. And the oil and gas guys are just. We used to say in the oil and gas industry that if you take a Democrat in America's argument for renewables, then you have a Republican's argument for nuclear power. It's the same argument, okay? Because the oil and gas guys knew they were more cost effective until recently. So the the guys pro nuclear are saying, look, in the cost we're quoting you, yes, it is a bit higher than the rest, but we including decommissioning. Do solar panels and do wind and all these things, do they include their own decommissioning costs, and do coal power include it? And are we then talking the same numbers? That is the account.
All right, yeah. Well, given that whatever is left over from us, okay, typically a solar farm goes into a 20-year contract, as does a wind farm. Now, when they come to the end of their lifespan, I very much doubt that the company is just simply going to pack up and leave everything there. Those things will still be working. So my assumption is that they would probably sell them or something. And sure, one's got to treat the renewable energy companies just with a critical eye as well. They're definitely no angels, I know that. And they also need to be watched over about what they do. And whatever is in their contracts for running the plant for those 25 years needs to have very clear terms about what happens when they're finally finished and so on. And that needs to be.
But are they being put in place in South Africa, to your knowledge, those terms and conditions, or is it sort of like we provide power now and we fix it later?
Well, yes, it's difficult to get to see those actual contracts. It's just like the nuclear sector is rather secretive. The same can also be said of the renewable energy sector. I find it extremely difficult to get some of the basic information out of them. If one goes to websites and so on, well, all one will see is, okay, we've got so many panels and building has created so many jobs. It doesn't tell you much else. Yeah. So, maybe not to the degree you get from the nuclear sector, where they'll literally tell you, no, this is none of your business, trust us, kind of thing, which is also not right. But yes, the whole energy sector is very much money driven, and so we've got to. We need the public and the government to constantly watch over this and make sure these sort of things are attended to.
And so you're saying the public should ask, first of all, for transparency. That's essentially what we're asking for, and transparency in the contract. And do you have a current estimate of how much the proposed quote-unquote Russian plant is going to cost?
All right. My estimate is, I would guess that if it's a 2.5 gigawatt plant, right? Because the previous estimates I had was on the 9.6 gigawatt, where I would have said at least R1 trillion, which in terms of euro would be 550 billion euros, more or less. So it possibly as much as double that. Okay, now if you scale it down, that will clearly bring down the cost by quite a bit. So in terms of rands, okay, now we're also a few years down the line, there has been a little bit of inflation. So we're probably talking of something of the order of about 250 billion rand, I would imagine, to get
250 billion rand, and the Eskom is in debt already with.
Yes, that's money. Right. Yeah, they're getting close to 500 billion. So that's just a ballpark figure. If one sort of tries to scale what the estimates were for. Probably best compared with the Egyptian and Turkish plants.
So it's just not economically feasible, which is a shame to me. I was hoping that maybe there can be some way to make it economically feasible.
Yes, I mean we can look at let's see, the Egyptian build was I think comes to more or less the same size, and I'd really need to look up the figures, but they're literally the Russians have Rosatom has put an estimated cost to it, so that's more or less what we'd be looking at. If I think I recall something of that would probably come in the region of about 250 billion rand. At least that's a sort of ballpark figure that we'd be looking at.
Okay, that's quite concerning. Okay, so just say way forward for South Africa, as you say, we need to ramp up renewables. Okay, we need to do it ASAP, as soon as yesterday, to get electricity out. Even if it's not perfect, it's better than nothing. And then later on, we need to generate wealth first, and then we can look into these things. Yes, that's essentially the argument I'm hearing.
Well, yeah, essentially, if the country sticks to the electricity integrated resource plan for electricity, I mean, that's been worked out by people that have run all sorts of models about what is required and so on. they have in the past always overestimated the demand. I think they haven't factored in that with electricity costs going up and so on, people have become more inclined to save electricity. Also with things like load shedding, I think there's much more of an appreciation now that you need to try and save on your electricity cost if you can. I think it's also been experienced in other countries. Initially, you find quite a rapid increase in electricity consumption, and then it gradually plateaus. And I think in most European countries at the moment, it's plateaus, possibly even going slightly down the use. So all these models are usually, certainly the original one, the one in 2010, which foresaw this 9.6 gigawatt of nuclear, they were estimating far more consumption even now than is actually the case. So question is really how much electricity does the country actually need? And in my view, what's in the current integrated resource plan for electricity is probably still is safe as far as making sure that there is enough there. Question is also how quickly do you actually decommission the old coal plants, because they're definitely not going to be able to go on, whether there's global warming or not. They're not going to be able to carry on indefinitely. So something needs to be done about that. And in that case, what does one replace them with? I personally, I'm on record as saying that I don't see this 100% renewable option as anything that's going to happen in the next 20 years or so. It's despite renewals often surprising in how much better they are advancing than people would have expected. I think in 20 years' time, South Africa is still going to be sitting with, say, probably about 50% renewables and 50% from other sources. That would be my prediction.
Do you have an opinion on the gas project they're planning in the Free State and the ones in the south of the country, the gas they discovered? Is that going to play some role?
Well, that's also something which has been going on for so long that it was always supposed to be the miracle cure to South Africa's energy problems. And, yes, they do find things, but ultimately I don't think those things are going to make a huge difference to what we have. I think it's more of it might, for a country like Mozambique, and that it might provide more income than they have been getting. I don't think it's going to make a huge change to South Africa's electricity dynamics. And the same thing goes also for the hydro plants, because one of the things which is still in the current integrated resource plan is this Inga Dam on the Congo, which
that they've been talking about since my father was in school. Okay, it's in the 70s, so it's never going to happen.
Paper, it sounds all very wonderful, but there's all sorts of reasons why.
Well, the big issue we have with hydro in Africa in general is, okay, in Norway hydro works because they've got fjords shaped like this, so you've got a pressure head all the time. Our dams are dispersed. So if you have a drought, you don't have water. And New Zealand, ironically, during this winter now, and I was surprised it happened during winter. Usually happens during a drought season. They had to restart the coal power station now to make up for the shortfall in hydro. So hydro's got the same issue that intermittence has got. Maybe it depends on the geography essentially, but you're going to need a backup for it. And I don't think it's going to work.
Yes, that's right. So our problems are not going to be away. I think something that always needs to be pushed a little bit more is this whole question of energy efficiency, energy efficient buildings and so on. I think that's something where there's a lot of scope for things to improve in South Africa.
That is.
Drives around at night and looks at the amount of lights on which shouldn't be on and so on. So I think we need a mind shift on that front. I think that could reduce the total consumption by a good 10, 20%. Also, if people were consciously trying to not to waste electricity. I think that's something which probably should be pushed as well.
How do you push that?
Yes, I think it's for a start. One can just simply just make sure that all buildings have energy efficient lighting and so on. And just once you regulate something, once you start fining people for leaving the lights on, I suppose that sort of thing always seems to work. And also the cost, in a sense, also does. The electricity sector it's become quite good. In Europe, I know they use it all the time. They're adjusting rates if they want to achieve some sort of a shift. They want to make sure people use their power more during the middle of the day rather than in the evenings. They just change the cost of it.
I'm not
sometimes. So
convinced that people actually look at the price though, but they see it at the end of the month and then they feel guilty afterwards. But it is the case here that it flips up and down. Although in France, because we have nuclear everywhere, we get a constant price, and I'm satisfied with that as well.
all
It's not
right.
like the Germans. Um, yeah, so okay, I think you've essentially given the argument for nuclear. I mean, people can see Anton Eberhard's critique against it, and has essentially referred me to you, and it's the same critique. The economics doesn't make sense. It's not a position that you're anti-technology. Okay, that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
think,
that's right.
because that's what
I
you've
think
been
it's also,
accused of.
oh, no, I don't know who's been accusing me of that, but yeah,
No,
that's right.
I thought.
I think the reason for the ideological thing is that it's basically if you put yourself on the one side, it's almost like you're endorsing a certain kind of position, and that it's almost like but yes, the matter has become highly politicized, and I think the nuclear sector should have just been more active in the country in distancing themselves from that. I think it would have made things a lot
Okay, so
lot easier.
I'm sending a message to them because I'm going to send it to people at NERSA this video. And I'm going to tell them what you're saying is you're not opposed to NERSA. You don't want it to close down. You actually like South Africa's nuclear. You're just asking for transparency and honest numbers.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't want to go shut the whole place down tomorrow. So, but if it's doing what it can do, if it's doing it in a manner which is open and transparent, if it's done in a manner that it's not threatening the rest of the country economically more than anything else. So I think the nuclear sector just really needs to look at itself openly and needs to, take a decision that they're going to now operate in a different manner. That they see
Okay.
themselves as a partner rather than somebody who's here to enforce something which doesn't make economic sense. Certainly not at this point.
Because
And
I have a view that the secrecy of the sector worldwide is just as much responsible for the ideological pushback they've got. Because you didn't engage in people and the public, you had fanaticism growing out of it. Because that's what I saw in Germany in particular. I think post Fukushima, in my view, Germany made a mistake. They went too quickly, too fast, and it became very ideological very quickly. And now they're ramping up coal power stations to make up for the loss of the coal shortfall, of nuclear shortfall.
Yeah. Okay, accept your
Yeah.
viewpoint. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Okay.
anyways, I think we've exhausted the conversation.
Yeah.
I'll say thank you very much for the input
Sure.
here. You're at the University of Johannesburg, that's right.
That's
Is it still
yeah.
a good university to study at?
I'd like to hope so. Yes, although it's becoming increasingly difficult under COVID for students. I mean, it's just not quite the sort of interaction one would normally get. But all right, we
Yeah.
are learning to move online.
You've,
So,
you've managed to survive. Okay. Well, Prof,
yeah.
thank you very much. I appreciate the
Okay, no,
conversation.
thank you. Oh, okay, good then. Right then.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.